A stranger showed up at my door, holding a baby, and said my wife was supposed to pick her up, but my wife and I don't have any children and never did. The coffee was still hot in my hand when I opened the front door. Tuesday morning, 7:53. The kind of quiet spring morning where the neighborhood feels asleep and the light comes in sideways and everything looks like it's going to be fine. I was in my flannel shirt, still had bed creases on my face, thinking about nothing more serious than whether to scramble eggs or just grab a granola bar before I had to be at the Whitmore job site by 9. And then I saw him. A man I'd never seen before was standing on my porch holding a baby carrier. He was maybe 40, stocky, work shirt with a name patch on the chest, one hand gripping the handle of the carrier, the other raised like he was already halfway through an apology. The baby inside was awake, tiny, wrapped in a yellow blanket with white ducks printed on it. I stood there with my coffee and just looked at him. He said, "I'm sorry to bother you. Your wife is supposed to pick up her daughter today." 3 seconds of complete silence. Her daughter. My wife's name is Claire. We've been married 6 years. No kids. That was the plan we agreed on 2 years into the marriage. Sitting in our kitchen in the house we hadn't even finished paying down yet. Wait, save. Get the business stable. Maybe next year, we always said. Every year next year. And I was okay with that. Mostly okay. Claire wanted to make partner at the firm first, and I understood ambition. I respected it. The baby in that carrier was maybe 3 months old. I said, "I think there's been a mistake. We don't have any children." The man, Marcus, he told me, he runs a daycare called Little Pines 2 streets over on Crestview, pulled out his phone, turned the screen toward me. It was a registration form. Claire's handwriting. I recognized it immediately. The slight leftward slant she'd had since college, the way she printed her 7s with a crossbar, our address at the top, her signature at the bottom. Mother, Claire Marie Henderson. Child, Sophie Grace Henderson. Date of birth, December 19th, 4 months ago. My knuckles went white against the doorframe. Marcus was already backing up, already explaining. He had 8 other kids inside alone. Sophie was dropped off every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 8:30. Never late, never missed pickup. Not once in 4 months, he said, until today. He'd called Claire's cell 6 times, went to voicemail every time, so he drove here. I told him to wait. I went inside, called Claire, 4 rings, voicemail, called again, voicemail. 3rd time, I didn't hang up at the beep. I said, "Claire, there is a man at our door with a baby. He says she's yours. Call me back right now." My voice cracked on the last word. I didn't try to smooth it out. Marcus couldn't stay. He handed me a folder thick with papers, a birth certificate, immunization records, feeding notes, all of it in Claire's careful handwriting. And then he set the carrier inside the door. And then he left. And I was alone in my front hallway holding a baby that apparently belonged to my wife. I brought her to the couch, sat down. My hands were shaking so badly that I gripped the edge of the cushion to steady them before I touched the carrier buckle. Sophie had started crying by then, a thin, reedy sound. I'd never changed a diaper in my life. I'd held exactly 2 babies, both at birthday parties, both for less than 60 seconds, while their mothers watched me like I was defusing a bomb. But I figured out the bottle fast, found them already prepped in the insulated pocket of the diaper bag, warmed one under the tap the way I'd seen somebody do once in a YouTube video I'd watched for no reason I could ever explain. She latched on immediately. Silence. She looked up at me while she drank. She had Claire's nose, that slight upturn at the very tip. I know that nose. I've kissed that nose 10,000 times. I'd know it anywhere. I sat there on my own couch, feeding a baby I'd never heard of, and I started doing the math. December birth, count back 9 months. That's March. March. I remembered March. The renovation project in Riverside had me working 60-hour weeks. Claire was preparing for a big pitch at the firm. We barely saw each other. She'd mentioned a conference in Seattle that month. 2 nights, maybe 3. I hadn't thought twice about it. She traveled for work a few times a year. My phone buzzed. A text from Claire. "I'm so sorry. I know you're confused. I need you to meet me. Just you, please. I'll explain everything." I looked down at Sophie. I texted back. "I have your daughter here. What am I supposed to do with her?" 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Came back. Then bring her. We need to talk about everything. Miller Park. The pavilion by the lake. 30 minutes. I strapped Sophie into the carrier as carefully as I could, like she was made of something that could shatter, and I drove. Before I tell you what happened at that pavilion, I need to back up. I need you to understand who Claire was before she became someone I didn't recognize. I met her in 2016 at a mutual friend's housewarming in Breckenridge. She was 28. I was 30. She was standing in the kitchen arguing about zoning law with the city planner she'd just met, and she was winning. Completely unbothered. Precise. She knew exactly what she believed, and she was never cruel about it, just relentlessly certain. I was gone inside of 10 minutes. We exchanged numbers and she texted first, which surprised me. We were engaged by 2018 and married in October of that year in a small ceremony in Estes Park. 17 guests, her mother officiating. She made partner at Harding & Lowe in 2021. I watched her cry in the parking garage when she got the call. Happy crying, the kind she almost never let herself do. The firm was demanding. Late nights, weekends sometimes. Travel, more than I liked but never more than I complained about, because I knew the deal I'd signed up for. Claire was not someone who coasted. She gave everything to the things she cared about. That was one of the reasons I loved her. We'd had exactly 1 serious fight about the kids question. February of last last year, about 15 months ago. She'd gotten home late, I'd made dinner that had gone cold, and I finally said what I'd been thinking for a while, that I was starting to want a family, that I didn't want to wait until it became biologically complicated, that I needed a real timeline, not next year, an actual conversation. She sat down and told me she wasn't ready. Career, she said. 5 years of partnership first. She wanted to feel established before she took any time away. I heard her. I agreed eventually, because she cried, and it wasn't manipulative crying. It was exhausted crying, the kind that comes from someone already stretched too thin. I backed down. I think about that night differently now, because the math says Claire would have gotten pregnant in March of last year, 1 month after that conversation. And now I wonder, did she already know when we had that fight that she wasn't planning to have a family with me at all? Or did she simply not want to tell me why she'd changed her mind? Either way, something in that kitchen conversation wasn't the whole truth. She had a friend I didn't love, Donna Marsh. They'd met at the firm 8 years ago before Donna moved to Portland to open her own practice. They talked constantly. Donna was smart, successful, and always seemed to think the rules were optional when you were talented enough to ignore them. She flew out to see Claire 2 or 3 times a year. They had a particular energy together that I never fully trusted. Not jealousy, exactly. Just a feeling that when Claire was with Donna, she was operating under a different set of values than when she was with me. I found out later that Donna knew about Sophie from the beginning, but that came later. In the months between March and the morning Marcus showed up at my door, I had noticed things. Small things I explained away in real time because the alternative explanation was too large to hold. Claire's silhouette changed in the summer. I thought it was stress weight. She said so herself. She'd been working grueling hours. She switched gyms in June, said the new one was closer to the office. She wore loose sweaters in July in Colorado, which I thought was an air conditioning thing. She took a long weekend in August, called it a firm retreat in Denver. We were intimate less frequently, which I attributed to stress and schedules. We slept in the same bed through all of it. In September, she told me she was doing a cleanse. Specific foods, limited alcohol, made sense. She'd said before she wanted to be healthier. In October, she said she had a conference in Atlanta, 4 days. When she came back, she seemed different, lighter, in some way I couldn't identify. I asked if the conference went well. She said yes. She seemed tired. I made her soup. That was a Thursday. Sophie was born a few weeks later, in December, in a hospital in Atlanta, while I was at my mother's house in Fort Collins for Christmas, texting Claire that I loved her and missed her. She sent a picture of what she said was her hotel room at another work conference. She was in a hospital 48 hours after that picture was taken. I know this because I looked at the birth certificate later. December 19th. The hospital was Atlanta Medical Center on Boulevard. She'd given her name and address, listed the father as unknown. She'd done all of this alone. That part broke something in me that had nothing to do with betrayal, that she'd done it alone, that she'd been in a hospital by herself with a baby, and she'd called Donna, I found out later, but not me. She'd decided at some point that she could handle everything except the truth. What happened between September and that Tuesday morning in April was a slow escalation of half-truths that I only understood in hindsight. She set up an apartment, studio on the east side of the city, $900 a month-to-month lease. I found the lease later. She'd signed it in October, a week before Sophie was born. She'd been paying for it out of a personal savings account I didn't have access to, separate from our joint account that she'd opened in August. Almost $14,000 moved out of her personal investment account over 6 months. After Sophie was born, she hired a part-time babysitter, a 20-year-old named Kira, who thought Claire was a single mother. She enrolled Sophie at Little Pines Daycare 3 days a week. She arranged her work schedule around pickup times. She told people at work she had a niece she helped look after. She told her own mother, who lives in Phoenix, that she'd made a personal decision and asked her not to call the house line. Her mother kept that secret for 4 months. I will never fully forgive that. In January and February, Claire began creating small but consistent distance, working more weekends, staying at the office on nights that I now understand she was with Sophie. She wasn't cold to me. That's what I want people to understand. She was affectionate. She was present. She made dinner on the nights she was home. We watched television together. She held my hand during movies. She was performing normalcy with such precision that I mistook it for the real thing. I started feeling uneasy in March, not for any identifiable reason, just a general wrongness I couldn't name. She seemed distracted. She checked her phone more. Twice she looked at me with an expression I didn't understand, and then looked away. I asked her once if something was bothering her. She said she was tired. I believed her. I was building a deck for the Whitmore family in Longmont at the time. A big project, good money. I was 3 days from finishing when Marcus knocked on my door. I think sometimes that if I'd been home instead of at the job site the Monday before, I might have seen her car pull out of our street at 8 in the morning on a daycare day. I might have followed. I might have known, but I wasn't home. And so I answered the door on a Tuesday, and the world changed with a cup of coffee in my hand. At Miller Park, I spotted Claire's Subaru before I'd even turned off the engine. She was under the pavilion already, arms wrapped around herself, pacing the length of one of the picnic tables. When she saw my truck, she went still. I got out, got the carrier out, walked to the pavilion. She looked destroyed, eyes swollen nearly shut, hair pulled back in a way that wasn't careless so much as abandoned. She'd been crying for hours and hadn't stopped recently. I set the carrier on the table and waited. She looked at Sophie. Her whole face changed. Something raw and helpless moved across it. She said, "I didn't know how to tell you." And then it came out. Not in order. Not in any kind of prepared speech. It came out the way things do when someone has been holding them down for so long that the pressure finally becomes impossible. Fast and broken and mixed up. I had to piece it together while she spoke. Seattle, March of last year. A 2-day conference at the Renaissance downtown. A man named Daniel Foss, marketing director at a firm in Portland, a friend of Donna's, which is how they'd ended up seated together at a dinner she hadn't wanted to go to. Too much wine. A hotel room she still can't explain to herself. One night, she came home and told herself it was over. A mistake that ended the moment she got on the plane. Then in May, she took a pregnancy test in a CVS bathroom and sat on a toilet lid for 40 minutes, unable to move. 8 weeks along. She knew immediately. She and I hadn't been together that month, not once. The Riverside renovation had me leaving the house before 6 every morning and getting back after dark. She did the math the same way I did, sitting on that couch with Sophie. There was no version of this story where the baby was mine. She said she almost told me. She picked up the phone 3 separate times, but she was terrified. She said it in a way that made it clear she didn't expect that to be sufficient explanation, just the only one she had, so she built a structure around the secret instead. The apartment, the babysitter, the gym that wasn't a gym. She told Donna in June. Donna, predictably, said she'd handle it. Donna, in fact, is the one who found Little Pines daycare, who helped Claire move the money, who drove her to Atlanta for the birth. Donna was the one in the room when Sophie was born because Claire had decided that I couldn't be. I stood there listening to all of this with my hands flat on the picnic table, very still. When she finished, I said, "What was the end game, Claire? What were you going to do? When were you going to tell me?" She didn't answer for a long time. Then she said, "I kept thinking I'd figure out a way." I almost laughed. I didn't. A way to do what? To have an entire hidden family and a real one at the same time? For how long? "I don't know," she said. Her voice was barely audible. "I kept thinking I'd know more later, that it would get clearer." Sophie woke up, started crying. Claire moved toward her instinctively, arms already out. I picked her up first. I don't know exactly why I did that. Some combination of habit. I'd been holding her for 2 hours by that point, and something I can only describe as territorial on her behalf. Sophie didn't know this park. She didn't know that woman's arms from mine, not really. She settled on my shoulder almost immediately. Claire watched. Her expression was something I don't have a word for. She said very quietly, "You're good with her." I didn't respond to that. I looked at her. At this woman whose nose I'd kissed 10,000 times, whose face I knew better than I knew my own, who had packed a hospital bag and driven to Atlanta and had a baby and come home and made me soup. And I felt the specific grief of realizing that you've been loving someone who wasn't there, that you were alone in the relationship before you knew it. I said, "Go to your apartment tonight. Don't come home." She nodded, didn't argue, gave me the address I didn't have, gave me the key I didn't know existed, reached out and touched Sophie's hand one time. Her fingers were shaking. Then she walked to her car. I stood under that pavilion and watched her go and thought, she's been carrying this alone for over a year, and I don't know whether to feel sorry for her or furious that she chose that. Both, I decided. Both at the same time. For a long time, both. That night, Sophie slept in the guest room in a portable crib I found already set up in her bag. Claire had packed for a longer absence than a Tuesday pickup, which told me she'd known the secret was close to breaking. I sat on the kitchen floor for a while, not crying, just sitting, the kind of stillness that comes after something that's too large to react to all at once. I called my brother Kevin in Denver. He answered on the second ring. I told him the whole thing. He didn't say much. At the end, he said, "What do you need?" I said I didn't know yet. He said, "Okay, I'm here." And somehow, that was enough. At 11:15, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. "We need to talk. About Sophie, about Claire, and about what I found out today that changes everything." I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed back, "Who is this?" 3 dots. Then, Daniel Foss. "I'm Sophie's biological father. I just found out she exists. And I have texts from Donna Marsh that you need to see." Daniel Foss drove to Colorado from Portland in 2 days. I know because he called me the next morning and I told him he could come. I don't know exactly why I made that decision. Partly curiosity. Partly because I had the feeling that whatever he'd found out was something I needed to know before any decisions were made. He was not what I expected. 42. Quiet. Looked like he hadn't slept in a week, which made sense. He sat at my kitchen table across from Sophie, who was in her carrier on the table between us, wide awake, gnawing on her fist, and he looked at her with an expression that I recognized because I'd felt it myself. The shock of a face that was partly familiar. He pulled out his phone and showed me the texts. They were between Donna and Claire. Donna had given her phone to Daniel. Explained to me later that she'd had a crisis of conscience after 12 months of helping Claire maintain the deception, and that Daniel deserved to know his daughter existed. Claire didn't know she'd done this. In the texts, Claire had been explicit. She was not going to tell me. She was not going to tell Daniel. The plan, as far as I could read it, was to continue indefinitely, to raise Sophie in the studio apartment on weekdays, and transition her to our house when the time was right, which was never defined. There was a message from November where Donna asked, "What if he finds out?" And Claire had written back, "He won't, and even if he does, I'll handle handle it. I handle it. That sentence sat in my chest like a stone. Daniel hadn't known any of it. He and Donna were professional acquaintances, had worked together briefly 2 years prior. He'd reached out to her about an unrelated business matter that week, and she'd broken down on the phone and told him everything. He looked at me across the table and said, "I don't know what you want from me. I don't know what I want either. But I know I want to know her. I know I have that right." He wasn't wrong. Sophie reached out toward the edge of her carrier and grabbed nothing. I said, "You do. But this is going to take some time to figure out." He nodded. He seemed like a decent man in a situation neither of us had built or wanted. I called a family attorney that afternoon, Kathleen Rourke, who worked out of a practice downtown. I'd never needed a lawyer before. I sat in her office with Sophie in my lap and explained the situation in as much detail as I could keep linear, and Kathleen took notes without any visible reaction to any of it, which I appreciated. She said the immediate question was custodial. Claire was the biological mother. She had legal standing. Whatever had happened in the marriage, the divorce proceedings, which I had clearly decided on sitting in her office, I realized, were separate from Sophie's custodial rights. She also said that Daniel's acknowledgement of paternity, voluntarily offered, simplified the biological question considerably. She said, more gently, "You have no legal obligation to this child. I want you to understand that clearly before you make any decisions." I looked down at Sophie, who had fallen asleep against my chest. I said, "I understand. I filed for divorce 10 days after that Tuesday. Claire was served at Harding and Lowe. I heard from Kevin, who heard from a mutual friend, that she'd had to leave the office early. I didn't feel good about that. I didn't feel bad either. Mostly, I felt nothing, which was its own kind of answer. The confrontation I'd been expecting, the one where Claire came to the house and demanded things, where she made the divorce about something other than what it was, happened on a Thursday evening 3 weeks after I filed. She knocked. I let her in. We sat at the kitchen table, which felt strange, like actors who'd forgotten they were in a play. She said she wanted to save the marriage. I asked her how she imagined that working. She said she loved me, that Sophie hadn't changed that she'd made a terrible mistake and spent a year making it worse out of fear, and that she knew that, and she wanted the chance to fix it. I let her finish. Then I said, "You had a baby, Claire. You moved that baby into an apartment 2 miles from here, and you lived with both of us in rotation, and you decided that was a version of our marriage you could keep. That wasn't a mistake with a bad series of choices after it. That was a choice you made every single day for over a year." She was quiet. "You decided what I could handle," I said. "You decided what I deserved to know. You gave me no chance to be a person in this. You made me into furniture." She started to cry, quietly, without drama. I said, "I think you should go." She said, "What about Sophie?" I said, "Sophie has a father. He's a decent man. Between you and him and whatever the lawyers work out, she's going to be fine. And you?" She said, "What about you and her?" I thought about Sophie's nose, the way she'd looked up at me while I fed her that first morning, the specific weight of her on my shoulder. I said, "I don't know yet." That was the most honest thing I said in that whole conversation. She left. Her mother called me 4 days later. Margaret, a woman I'd liked genuinely, respected genuinely, who had kept her daughter's secret for 4 months. She didn't apologize at first. She made a case for Claire. She said Claire had been terrified. She said I needed to understand the position Claire had been in. I let her talk. Then I said, "Margaret, you sat across from me at Christmas dinner in December. Sophie was 3 days old. You knew. You sat across from me, and you knew." Silence. She started to cry. I said, very calmly, "I need you to not call me for a while." I hung up. There's no triumph in that memory. Just wait. Margaret was a woman I'd considered a second mother. That part of the loss is real, and it doesn't have a clean ending. My own mother came from Fort Collins and stayed for 2 weeks. She didn't comment on the situation more than once. She said, "I'm sorry this happened to you," and then she just helped. She cooked. She held Sophie so I could sleep. She fixed the towel bar in the guest bathroom that had been loose for a year. Kevin drove up on weekends. He brought his wife Ellie, who happened to be a pediatric nurse, and who immediately cataloged everything in Sophie's medical folder and organized it by date, which was more useful than I can express. Donna Marsh lost Claire as a friend completely. Claire found out what Donna had done, giving Daniel the text, and by all accounts, it was a catastrophic falling out. I felt nothing about that. It was the one consequence of the whole situation that sorted itself. "Daniel and I found something I can only call a cautious working arrangement. We disagreed about things. He wanted more time than the initial custody schedule allowed. I wasn't part of that negotiation. I had no legal standing, but I was present for several of the conversations because Claire's attorney had made a mess of the first session and everyone had agreed to try a mediated approach. He was consistent. I'll give him that. He showed up every time. He paid every obligation without being asked twice. He asked thoughtful questions about Sophie's feeding schedule, her sleep patterns. He was not a man who was performing fatherhood. He was trying to actually learn it. That mattered. The divorce was finalized 11 months after I filed. Colorado required it. We had no children together, no business assets, just the house, the joint account, and 10 years of shared decisions to untangle. Claire took her personal savings. I kept the house. She waived any claim to it in exchange for a clean split on the retirement accounts. Kathleen made sure I understood every number before I signed anything. The house felt enormous for a while. Still does some nights. I finished the Whitmore deck, bid 3 more jobs that month. Worked, kept working. I see Sophie sometimes. That wasn't planned. It wasn't part of any agreement. It just evolved, the way the things that matter tend to, without a formal structure. Daniel asked me once, about 6 months in, if I wanted to be at Sophie's first birthday. He said he thought it would be good for her to have consistency with people she recognized. He was being generous, I think, but I also believe he meant it. I went. Claire was there. We were civil. Not warm. Civil. The kind of civil that costs something but doesn't break anything. She's in a smaller apartment now, near the firm. She looks like someone still learning to live with herself. I don't say that with any satisfaction. Sophie walked at 11 months, 3 steps, and then sat down hard and looked surprised. I was there for that. I don't know what that makes me to her. Not a father, not a stranger, something that doesn't have a name yet. I'm 38 now. I've started thinking about what the next version of my life looks like. I'm dating again, cautiously, which feels strange after so long. I'm better at asking questions I should have asked before. I'm better at sitting with answers I don't like. The morning Marcus knocked on my door with a baby carrier, I thought my world had ended. In some real sense, it had. The world I'd built in my head, the one where Claire and I had been honest with each other, where the foundation was what I thought it was, that world was finished. It wasn't coming back. But what I didn't know yet, standing on that porch with coffee in my hand, was that there was something on the other side of the collapse worth finding. Not a replacement for what I'd lost. Something genuinely different. A version of my own life that I was actually present in, instead of one that was being managed for me by someone who decided I couldn't handle the truth. I could handle it. I did handle it. I just wasn't given the choice. That's the part that still sits with me on quiet mornings when the light comes in sideways and the neighborhood feels asleep. Not the betrayal exactly. Not even the grief. Just the fact that someone I loved looked at me and decided I was too fragile to know my own life. I'd rather have had the pain at the beginning. I'd rather have been trusted with it. Sophie has Claire's nose. I'd know it anywhere. And somehow, impossibly, I hope she grows up knowing that even in the most fractured version of her beginning, there were people who showed up for her anyway, even when they had no obligation to, especially then.